This is the Be One Change One podcast, where our mission is to help listeners define values, practice integrity, and inspire change.
Our vision is to mentor men and empower them to achieve more by taking responsibility for shaping their own lives.
He's CAS, an evolving man who has been shaped by adversity and continues to grow through his imperfections.
And he's Roscoe, an imperfect work in progress that tries to suck less every day.
Between us, we have over 40 years of Air Force fighter pilot experience with countless hours as trainers, instructors, and mentors.
Join us and learn to take responsibility for your own life as we dive into subjects from leadership to resilience to vulnerability.
Be the one who changes their course. Be decisive, driven, and purposeful. Set the example for others. Lead. We wish we'd had this show when we were younger men.
Be the one.
The only thing I'll throw out there, dude, is I'm going to try real hard to not interrupt, but I'm working really hard on being more curious about things, and I don't have a big brain, so I can't hold a lot of questions in there. So I might just stop you and have to ask you about, space botany or whatever comes to my mind. So
love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, Cass, go ahead and introduce our guest today, man. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah. On the Be One Change One podcast, we're super excited to have Scott Kid Poteet. So Kid's a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who served 20 years in various roles that included commander of the 64th Aggressor Squadron, flying as Thunderbird 4, and he's also a graduate of the United States Weapons School, Tomahawks. Kid has logged over 3,200 hours in the Air Force with over 400 combat hours. And following his Air Force career, he served in various roles to include Director of Business Development at Draken International and VP of Strategy at Shift 4. He most recently served as the mission director on Inspiration 4, the world's first all-civilian mission to space, and helped raise over $240 million for St. Jude's Children's Hospital, which is badass, by the way. Currently, Kid is the mission pilot for Polaris Dawn, the first of 3 missions in the Polaris program, scheduled to launch, I believe, in September, right, Kid?
Actually, we're in quarantine right now. We're scheduled to launch on the 26th. So in 2 weeks.
26th of August. Okay, right on. Polaris Dawn will spend up to 5 days in orbit, flying higher than any Dragon mission to date, and will reach the highest Earth orbit ever flown. The crew will conduct a spacewalk, support scientific research designed to advance human health on Earth and health during future long-duration space flights, and be the first to test Starlink laser-based communications in space. So welcome to the podcast, Kid.
We're happy to have you, man. Thanks for having us. Yeah, we're excited.
Holy shit, what a resume.
Yeah, right.
I already have like 10 questions, man. So I guess I missed this in the bio, or when I read the bio, I skimmed over it real quick. But so you've already been to space?
No. I was.
You were just a mission director on the ground.
Mission director, and even that term is very loosely used. The mission directors at SpaceX Mission Control, totally different ball game. Those are brilliant minds. I was just responsible for coordination of the mission. I did a lot of the logistics, the fundraising, anything and everything the crew need, because when that whole thing came about, Jared wanted to make it bigger than himself. He's a visionary. Long story short, Jared Isaacman, he's the commander of my mission.
Okay.
Buddy of mine who started the company, Draken International. But when he had the vision for Inspiration 4, it was, bigger than himself, and he wasn't going to bring his buddies on this mission. It was going to be a random selection to prove that anyone could go to space. So we randomly selected his crew, and that kind of kicked off our space exploration journey.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Sorry, Cass, I broke your mojo, man. Go ahead.
No, well, like we were talking about in the pregame, man, we talk a lot about, setting the importance of personal values, setting goals, being able to pivot and dealing with adversity, building resiliency skills, all those things. And like, you have a very awesome background and story to tell, but I can't imagine that there weren't times along that path where you didn't face some real adversity in your life, or some really, you had to fight through some things to get to where you're going to be. So can you just share with us a little bit about, kind of your background and how you got in the Air Force and how you got to SpaceX, and just kind of how all of that unfolded? And maybe if you do have some specific stories that come to mind that relate directly to kind of just the adversity that you faced in some of these things, can you share with us some of that and just how you worked through it?
Absolutely. And I can even take a step further back with growing up. I was an absolute terrible student, C's and D's. I barely graduated high school, but I, was a big runner. I got recruited to run D1 cross country and track at the University of New Hampshire, but academics were definitely not my strong suit. So thankfully, I was able to get recruited to run. So I went to the university, and man, I chose a department that I could survive, which was outdoor education. So I spent 4 years at the University of New Hampshire doing scuba diving, rock climbing, winter mountaineering, whitewater rafting. I don't think I wrote one single paper, but I still struggled as a student. So there's a lot of adversity there, just trying to get through, the educational experience. But while I was there, I noticed a flyer to go fly on a KC-135. The ROTC program was pushing it. And I'm a very impulsive person. Jumped at the opportunity, got in the back of a KC-135, puked the entire time. I was prone to motion sickness growing up. I still am to this day. Stick me in the back of an Uber, game over if I'm not in control. So that was certainly a big challenge, obviously being a fighter pilot. But during that experience, I got to see the Green Mountain Boys get refueled, F-16s in the back of a KC-135. And that was enough to light my fire, and I talk about the 80s, Right Stuff. The Right Stuff came out. The original Top Gun came out. Obviously, those were motivations as well. But I joined the RTC program, did pretty good at that, ended up getting a pilot slot, went on to pilot training. But again, even in the beginning, I struggled with motion sickness. Was finally able to overcome that after, T-37s, I think I threw up every single flight. I thought I was over it, got to 38s. First flights, I had vomit coming up my mask into my helmet. It was a mess. But long story longer, it's I got over that. Scared of heights. I am terrified of heights. So that was just another challenge I had to
go to space,
overcome. Right? Why not?
Yeah, right.
Good thing I'm not. Actually, they make fun of me because the Starship, the new Starship vehicle, the tower, is enormous. And we went to the top of it. I think it's like 480 something feet. And I can't get near the edge. Jared has no problem. The other crew members have no problem, but I'm not a big fan. Structures. It's like I'm fine on the side of mountains, flying fighter jets with the canopies, but it's structures that I have issues with. Anyways, back to your adversity discussion. Those were things I had to kind of overcome to become a fighter pilot. But to your point, I was very driven. I had set a goal. I wanted to achieve that goal, and I have a hard time recognizing, succumbing to the obstacles that I did face. I had to figure out a way to solve that, whether it was through, just getting through my academics, getting through the motion sickness, the fear of heights. When I know that goal is out there, I want to achieve it, and I'll do what it takes and put in the time. I think honestly that's why I'm attracted to athletics and doing the triathlons, and I never settle for a result that I get in a race and an Ironman competition. I always think there's kind of something else out there that I can achieve, so I'll continue to set those goals. And in fact, I'm training for one right now, the end of September in Chattanooga, just to qualify for, amateur side, not the pro side, but the World Championships in Kona. So that's just a little insight of my personality. I'm definitely a stubborn person, and driven. Wife's not crazy about that at times, based on some of these adventures that I've set forth. But yeah.
How does spending 5 days in space affect triathlon training?
It's not good, especially when I'm hitting the peak of my training.
Isn't there like a lot of atrophy or something that goes on? Absolutely,
and that's something we're studying right now. With our mission, there's four big objectives you talked about: the spacewalk, testing Starlink, altitude record, and then we're doing 40 science and research experiments. And we selected these universities, nonprofits, hospitals to identify challenges that we're going to face in long duration missions in the future. About going back to the lunar surface, eventually going to Mars. And when you do that, there's obviously challenges we got to figure out because these humans are going to be up there. Talking about going to Mars, it's 8+ months to get there. However duration, it's not going to be a one-way trip. They got to come back 8+ months. So you're talking multiple years, and not using your skeletal system, your bones, your ligaments, your tendons, your muscles. You got to figure out ways to exercise and not atrophy. They use the treadmill for multiple hours each day up on the ISS. Training's not
those
good,
videos of those guys,
but thankfully it's only
in.
5 days. Yeah, and there's resistance bands can help out, but it is a challenge. But thankfully ours is only 5 days, so maybe that's a good a taper week.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, kid, because you talked about, you've got just this kind of insatiable drive. Was that always innate to you, or is that something that you developed through athletics? Was athletics and getting involved in running and things like that, where you found a way to to kind of push yourself on a regular basis and see if you could shave off one more second, shave off, a little bit of time? Was that part of it for you, or was that something that was just kind of always innate to your character and to who you are?
I would say I was more born with it. I mean, I can think back. The first time I got counseled in school was kindergarten because I had to be first in line. My mom always reminded me of this story. It's like she bribed me with, "Hey, I'll buy you a new backpack if you can just chill out and fall in line and not have to be first all the time."
How did you not get the call sign Ricky Bobby?
Seriously, you ain't first, you're last.
That's right, man. God dang it, kindergartner teacher. I'm not last. I'm first. Look at me. I'm a winner.
Taking them out the knees to get up
That's
front.
That's right, man. Sometimes you got a Nancy Kerrigan a bitch. That's all I'm saying.
Tanya Harding her. Even in races, I couldn't stand not winning. So I would say it's definitely part of my personality. But I have to be motivated for that goal. Perfect example is academics. I was not motivated to do well. Nothing really inspired me in your basic core academics. Thankfully, my kids take after my wife, who was a 4.0 plus kind of student. But I certainly have to be focused on and have a motivation for whatever that goal is. I just can't be giving something and expect to achieve it. It's got to be something that I'm inspired to do. And that's the advice that I give to my kids. It's like, that's why I don't push them in sports. If I've got some, I won't name which ones, are very driven. They might not have the talent as the other ones, but if they're driven, I'm going to support them all the way. But if they don't have that drive, I'm not going to push them because I'm not always going to be there to give them that shove.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk a lot about passion and purpose on here, and I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Is if you're not passionate about it and you haven't found purpose in that goal or that endeavor that you're after, then you're less willing to put in the maximum effort that it deserves to be able to overcome some of those obstacles that you mentioned. And I mean, we've all faced that, and we all have our techniques and stuff. But do you have any good stories, like a specific instance of something that you faced specifically that you just had to either barrel through it or find a way around it?
Like weapon school?
Like weapon school.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh man, I'll never forget my Sat 1. And for those not familiar, it's building block approach, weapon school. You go through all the different phases, and it's progressively more difficult as you get through the program. And kind of right there in the middle is when you make this transition from learning how to fly an F-16 and engage it in air to air. And then you start focus on the air to ground piece of it, and your Sat 1, your surface attack, very basic straight flight or straight mission. and it was the first time we were carrying heavyweights. 6 Mark 82s, just live munitions, and it's not a range that is unmanned, except for some other specific areas where there are. And I thought I had all the mission planning. It was put in all the effort, overconfident on this mission. And CAS, we were doing these hard deliveries from high altitude and dropping these live munitions, and I overly confident selected the wrong targets. I selected the heated MAV targets where they were in close proximity to actual people. And I'll never forget, to this day, I can still hear Spike Landrum screaming on the radio, abort, 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 after I had already pushed the tickle button. And I have these live Mark 82s heading down track. I thought instantly I, potentially could have killed somebody, being that overconfident. And not only the lessons learned, that's a whole chapter in and of itself of what the mistakes I made and how I tried to overcome that big ass mistake, but the growth from that, trying to gain the confidence and trust from the instructors moving forward, and having the confidence to pick it up again and go back after that, that red bordered grade sheet went into my grade book. So that's definitely came to my mind as far as coming over adversity. Yeah.
So how did you do that though, right? Because that's a big deal, man. I mean, especially because there's what people don't realize if you haven't been to the weapons schools, it's a pressure cooker, and there's so much pressure put on the students every day for every sortie. And like we talk a lot about on the podcast, that perfection is a fallacy and you should strive for excellence, right? Because even if you're trying to get 100% on every test, but even if you get a 96, that's still pretty damn good, right? But sometimes at weapons school, man, I felt like no, it was perfection every day. That was basically what was expected always, right? And so there's all that pressure, and you go out there and you have this big failure, and so what was it that allowed you to kind of go reset, recage, onto Sat 1X? I'm going to push through this. I'm going to do it right this time. Can you talk to that at all?
Honestly, it's going to sound cliche to you guys, but it was one of the pillars. It was humbling myself.
Yeah.
When you get to weapons school in the F-16, you got your air-to-air guys. The block back in the day was the Block 50 guys showing up who had a lot of experience in air-to-air and sea. But then you had your Block 40 guys coming from Aviano and Hill and Osan that had all the air-to-ground experience and the FAC experience. Well, I felt like I was playing catch-up in the air-to-air phases, and then as we make this transition, man, Sat, I got this. I'm a Block 40 guy, FAC qual, coming from Aviano. I had to take a step back and humble myself, and that's one of the pillars. Approachable, humble, and credible.
Yeah.
And it was not only humbling myself with the instructors, but it was with my peers as well in the class, and relying upon them when I go into this phase, thinking I'm going to be the ones helping out my bros get through these phases. It was now that I've regressed in proving myself. I've got to humble myself and approach my bros to help me kind of get through that. So I think it's being willing to show your vulnerabilities. And you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Hopefully you're listening more than you're speaking. And in those situations, it's me asking the questions and trying to find different solutions, not assuming that I know everything, in this case, the air-to-ground piece of it, but willing to listen to not only the instructors, but my peers as well, and solutions that they might have to help me solve some of the challenges that I'll face.
Yeah. No, that's powerful, man. I mean, Roscoe will say, go ahead, Roscoe, because I know you want to say it.
Yeah, I wrote it down and put a big square around it. So this is something that comes up on almost every episode, and it's humility is a superpower. We've been saying it for a year now, and I think when you started telling that story, and you mentioned the word overconfidence or super confident in your abilities on that particular mission, I saw where this was going, because it's such a trap for us, and especially for we who may be, I don't know, driven type A kind of guys, whatever cliche or platitude you want to put on it. But I think we do fall into that trap fairly often. Is you kind of have this attitude of I've got this, and inevitably you're going to hit a point where you get knocked down a peg, and it's okay, man. But I think humility being a superpower. What I mean by that is when you reach a point where you can raise your hand and say, I don't know, or I messed up, then you open a door for other people to help you solve that problem. And you're inviting people to come into your team, and you're inviting instruction, and you're inviting the opportunity to learn stuff, instead of maybe going into it overconfident, like I got this. You're saying, man, maybe I don't have this, and maybe I can learn something from these other people and learn some new techniques, and maybe I get a buddy check on all my mission planning the next time, or whatever it may be. You learn some other tips and tricks. I kind of saw that coming when you were talking about the confidence piece of it. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
And Roscoe, that's spot on, because that's exactly what I'm going through right now and have gone through for the last 2+ years. You look at my crew. First off, space flight, there's 620, 630 astronauts who've been to space in the history of spaceflight. My crew alone, Jared, proven astronaut, highly intelligent individual, self-made, entrepreneur, very successful and very intelligent. And he's the brains behind this entire project. And then you have Anna and Sarah, who are these brilliant engineers who have worked at NASA, currently work at SpaceX. They're mission directors for mission control. Sarah taught Jared how to be an astronaut, so she is like the patch for SpaceX. And then you have Anna, who is responsible for writing the checklist. So she's writing the -1. And then you got Kid, in the entire 2+ years. What we've done for training, it's like your B course. We start off with the B course. We learn the systems, the avionics of the Dragon capsule. And you build upon that, crew resource management, you work as a crew, and then all the additional stuff that we go through, start getting to specific phases like the EVA, and the launch and the recovery, that downhill. We go through specific simulators for that, and you go through all the contingency operations for each one of those. And everything that we've been through, other than the climbing the mountain, the flying the fighter jets, the scuba diving, I might have them in those categories, but everything else, and I'm the 50-year-old. We got one in every. Well, we did have a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, and the 50-year-old. And I'm coming from fighter community, patch, Thunderbirds, aggressor, all that stuff. It's like I am the dumb dude in the room in the capsule. I have to rely upon them, the 20-something-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, to teach me on everything. And so if there's any way to characterize the experience I've been through over the last 2 to 3 years, it's humility, and I have to. There's a lot writing on this, and it's relying upon them and their expertise and to teach me what they know.
I was just about to say, how humbling is it to show up to a room and say, I'm just the shuttle pilot? Like, I mean, anybody else would be like, jumping out of their skin. But then you look around the room and it's like, I'm just the stick jockey, man. I'm giving you guys a ride to space. That's it, And I mean, that's gotta be surreal,
There's a lot of control from mission control. It is surreal, and talking with everyone else in the world. But I show up to SpaceX, and I think the average mean is about 28 years old in the entire organization. And they're all graduates of MIT and Stanford. And
what was that movie with the 3 old guys that went to space? What was that?
I know.
Clint Eastwood and Tommy Lee Jones and I can't remember.
Cowboys. Space
yeah,
Cowboys.
there you go. Space Cowboys.
Space
There
Cowboys.
you go.
That was it. Yep.
We got to put that one on the movie list. We got some movies to watch in quarantine.
I think we just found the podcast episode title, Space Cowboy. All right.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, but you know what's so good about what you said in that too, kid, is just in your experience at SpaceX now is, you know, because humility is kind of a double-edged sword. It's not just about recognizing that, you know, you may not be as prepared as you thought you were or relying on the folks around you, but like part of that too is staying curious, right? Being like it's having the ability to stay curious so that you can continue to learn, right? And not think that you've got everything so licked all the time that there's nothing else for you to learn anymore at that point. You know, I saw plenty of guys in our fighter career that kind of get to that point, but the fighter industry is such that it always tends to teach you that lesson eventually, even if you don't want to learn it.
Hey, dude, we've talked about this before, though. We've said stay curious and ... and fill it in, but explain that for just a second so let's really break that out for a minute. Because I mentioned earlier that I'm trying to be better at being curious and asking better questions and becoming a better interviewer, but I think that might be different than what you're talking about.
Well, a lot of the ways that we've couched it in the past, Roscoe, is to be curious and not judgmental, right? So don't take certain things at face value all the time. You know, listen, like Kid was saying, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Open your ears, listen, try to see if there's something that you can take away from a conversation or an individual. But in Kid's case too, I think with the humility piece of it, that curiosity is just the recognition of, you know what, man, I've got a lot to learn and there's a lot that I can learn from the people around me. And we've talked about this in leadership, right? Like if you're a leader and you've got a team, your job isn't to know the right answer every single time, all the time, and to be the only person that has the answer and, you know, to be the authoritative person that rides shotgun over everybody and tells them how they should do things. Like it's okay as a leader to go, guys, I'm not quite sure how we should tackle this problem. Thoughts, right? And then take feedback. And kind of be able to weed out the chaff from the wheat and go, hey, those are great ideas. That one's probably not going to work in this situation because maybe you have a little more depth and knowledge and experience about what's going to go on in the background or how things are actually going to come to fruition, right? And so that's that piece that I'm talking about of the humility, you know, and that staying curious piece. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, I have one story from the very beginning of training. Our very first sim, you know, we go into it and we think, okay, this one should be pretty mundane. We'll start off with some basic EPs. And Melissa, who is our trainer, she's responsible for, you know, the syllabus and putting us through the simulators. She handed our ass to us, completely crushed us, because she gave us a scenario where we thought we knew the answer. You know, I'm relying upon the experts in the capsule to figure this one out. But we didn't work together as a crew. Everyone thought they knew which direction we were supposed to go, and it was a complete and utter failure. And we actually referred to that scenario, that example, that experience on a lot of interviews, just to share the fact that we didn't know everything and that we needed to stay curious and humble throughout this entire experience because we still had a lot to learn. This was a developmental mission. This isn't your bread and butter going to the ISS or just going to low Earth orbit. We're going to do the first commercial spacewalk. And that required doing modifications to the capsule, building a new suit, new protocol procedures, contingencies. All this stuff had to be developed, and it required us to stay curious and to stay humble in order to make sure that we are prepared the best way possible for this mission.
Yeah.
That probably had there was probably a giant learning curve as far as like team building and all that. And, you know, anybody who's gone to SOS probably knows the 4 stages of team building and stuff. But, you know, when you're in a capsule falling back to the Earth, things all of a sudden get a little bit more, I don't know, hairy, for lack of a better word. And, you know, if you haven't developed those kinds of things, Cass, you were talking about it earlier with, you know, there is a leader on every team. But at the same time, each team member has value, and going through those scenarios like you just did, you have to find what values those team members bring. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where can I lean, and who can I ask the questions to? So I can imagine that was part of that process too.
Yeah, and I think they actually have a really good structure of how they train us and how we execute and handle those contingencies. And a big part of it is just roles and responsibilities. To set the picture visually, you got 4 seats. The 2 middle seats have 3 screens, and you really can't see the screens on the outboard seats. And so it's Sarah on the left outboard and Jared in the commander seat. I'm in the pilot seat, which is the third seat, and Anna's in the fourth seat on the right side. And when a contingency happens, depending on the phase of flight, whether it's uphill or downhill, we're in our appropriate seats. If it's EVA, we're swapping around a little bit, but otherwise, 90% of the time we're out of our seats, and there's limited space. Depending on where we are in our phase of flight, there could be just stuff everywhere, cargo wise, because we're going through the science and research. And if an alarm goes off, it's like game on. There's an organized process of who's got what roles and responsibilities and how we're going to handle those. And it's critical because Sarah and Anna know these systems inside and out, and they got all the diagrams and the wire guide diagrams that we're used to in a -1 to be able to kind of start peeling that onion back, trying to figure out several layers of the system, whereas Jared and I might be running to the screen to read exactly what the system is saying, because there's multiple lines of defense, whether the capsule is going to fix the problem itself, whether mission control based on the data they're saying, or whether it's going to be us. And if it's us, there's a lot more involvement on what we're supposed to do. And if it's not choreographed, it could have, dire consequences if we're not careful. So, my point being is it took us assigning those roles, accepting those roles, and staying committed to them to make sure that in my lane or my avenue, I got to make sure I don't fail in what I'm supposed to be doing, trying to, overstep my bounds and do something that someone else is supposed to be working on. So that's something we certainly stay focused in on in our training and the simulators. And it's been helpful for us to, set ourselves up for success.
Yeah, we talk about that. We use a football analogy where, 11 people on the field have 11 different jobs, and the quarterback can't be worried about what the other guys are doing, or the running back can't be worried about what the receivers are doing, because if you're worried about what he's doing, then you're not doing your job to 100%. So just, do your job on every play, win the next play. Go ahead, Cass.
Yeah. So, Kid, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about just that transition from military over to civilian life, like Draken. I know it eventually led to Draken. I don't know if that was what you went right to or not, and then now to SpaceX. So we talk a lot about on the podcast about, keeping your eyes open for opportunity and creating opportunity. Sometimes you got to step out of your comfort zone to do that, right? And for guys like us, a lot of times that means leaving the Air Force, which can be a very uncomfortable experience, right? Because you're leaving something that you know very well and that you're very established in, that you've built a career in, to go do something completely different. And there can be a lot of risk involved with that. So can you talk through that process at all and just talk about, your pivot and how what were the scary parts about that, the risks that you were taking, the unknowns, the fears that you faced in how that was getting outside of your comfort zone and making that change?
Absolutely. And everything that I've been able to do certainly did not come easy, nor was an easy decision. Even leaving the military, my wife and I, it was a lot of long conversations because we weren't necessarily sure if we were ready at the 20-year point. I was coming off of, we were in Aviano for our second tour, bragging. And my last year was more or less spent in Bagram in Afghanistan with the triple nickel. And we, at that point, we kind of made the decision, okay, well, let's call it good at 20. My wife was facing a medical challenge, and we just needed the support of family and friends in my hometown area, the New Hampshire seacoast. And that was the number one priority, was family at that point. I didn't necessarily want to do the airlines. I wanted to do something different. And based on the relationships I'd built, which I think is also, something very important for setting up those opportunities, that whole networking and never burning a bridge, because you never know who you're going to run into, or who could have an influence over something you're going to do. A little small tangent is Shags O'Shaughnessy, General O'Shaughnessy. He was my DO at Aviano, my first Aviano assignment. Worked for him later at Nellis, and come to find out he works for SpaceX, and I see him every time we're out there. And he's a big influence in my life, and just having those relationships are pretty critical. But back to leaving the Air Force, I met Jared when I was doing the Thunderbirds. He was starting a civilian demo team called Black Diamond. Fast forward, I was in the aggressors. His civil demo team, he was thinking, okay, how can I evolve this and make it something bigger and better? So he started thinking about the commercial adversary service opportunity. And I was the commander of the aggressors. So we had a couple conversations. He's trying to figure out how a civilian organization could provide that service. And, what he was building was pretty risky, but had a lot of opportunities. So when I was retiring, I reached out, and yeah, they had just won a contract with Nellis to kick that off back in 2015. And I'm like, just kind of my nature. I'm like, yeah, let's talk it over with the wife, and she was very supportive, and so we gave that a shot. And so I started working for them. Ended up spending about 5 years doing that. I started flying, but I'm like, I kind of want to do something a little bit different. So I got involved in the business development side of it. So that opportunity was just, I would chalk it up to the relationships I'd built previously. And then with the support of the family, kind of committed to it based on more of a gut, I guess, decision versus, because it was a risk, leap of faith. They had a very short contract. It was more of a futuristic look than, here's some guaranteed work over the next couple of years. It was like, we'll see where it goes. And I spent 5 years doing that. And then when he sold the company, I'm like, it's just not the same anymore. I wasn't crazy about the new leadership. Therefore, I resigned from that position, immediately got picked up to go work in shift 4. Again, relationships and a risk, because it was in the business world of fintech, and I knew nothing about it. So it was a fire hose. That actually only lasted a couple months before this whole conversation with SpaceX started. And then just briefly, I could go on, but I'll try to wrap up this point, is I was doing the shift 4 stuff, and then Jared approached us with, hey, I'm having these conversations with SpaceX. It was by chance that he met with the CFO, wanted to kind of invest and get involved. And, oh, by the way, I'd love to be a customer at some point. And, timing worked out great. And they're like, oh, we're actually looking for the first civilians to kind of go into space. And that kind of kicked off Inspiration 4. And that opportunity, and the reason why it kind of ties into your points about opportunity and how you take advantage of those. He had kind of laid down this vision of, hey, this is going to be bigger than us. We want to make this a project where we can benefit life here on Earth, this whole partnership with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And we want to kind of make a statement about space exploration, that it's going to be accessible to anyone and everyone in the future. None of you guys in this room are going to go on this mission. But if you want to support, you want to help out, albeit I'd love your help. And that was like, absolutely, 100%. Sign me up. Whatever you need. I'll carry your bags. And it just kind of kicked off from there. And I picked up in every little job to help out the cause. So a lot of the coordination with the fundraising, merchandise, logistics. There was just the documentary crew for the Netflix. There was just so much because we didn't know what we were doing, and it was just make it up as we go. And it was a very fast and furious 6 to 9 months to make this all happen. Thankfully, it was very successful. They spent 3 days in space, and like you said, raised $250 million. So it was just all about taking that leap of faith and that relationship that I'd built, and staying driven. You know, it was like he had this ultimate goal, this vision, and I wanted to be a part of it. And you know, you just commit the effort.
Did you have something, Roscoe?
Dude, we talk about so many things on this show, but I want you to know, man, that one of the consistent messages that we have is opportunity, how to recognize them, how to be fearless enough to take them, keep your eyes on the horizon, and always kind of ask what's next out of life. And I want you to know, man, that just Saturday we were over at CAS's house recording with a guy that I had the pleasure of mentoring for the last year. And he had the same message. He's 25. He'd gotten out of the Air Force after 6 years, was a senior airman. And he has the same exact message as you do. So you don't have to be an astronaut to make this happen. You know, you don't have to have all these accolades and plaques on your wall and cool red helmets in your background. Anybody can do this stuff. But that's my point though, right? Is it's a skill that you have to learn, I think. And I was just listening as you were talking, and I'm thinking, man, my question to you is, was there a time, there has to be a time somewhere where you ran into a person, it was a handshake, it was a beer at a bar, it was a bump in a crud game or whatever it may have been. And then years later down the road, you run into that guy and somehow that relationship became pivotal in your life. I have my own stories of that. I know Cass has those stories, just random chance encounters. And I love what you said. Don't burn a bridge. Don't burn a bridge. Don't close a door, because you never know. 10 years from now, you might be working with that guy.
Absolutely. And the first story that comes to mind is General Darnell. He was a wing commander at Aviano. I was a young punk, even I think I may have been a captain at that point. Anyways, snacko level scheduler, and the Jags General O'Shaughnessy was the DO, and he's like, "Hey, this is roll call, or just the pilot meeting on Friday." He's like, "Hey, I need a volunteer, escort some civilian for a a tour of the simulator." And I raised my hand. And next week, fast forward the story, I give him this tour, commit the effort and time to really show him the facility. I put in the effort is the point. Come to find out, it's General Darnell's best friend. He was impressed by the facility and all that kind of stuff. Fast forward, I'm putting in my application for the Thunderbirds, and General Darnell is more or less writes my recommendation, former commander, 4-star general. And he more or less got my ticket punched for going to the Thunderbirds. And it was just a simple act of helping out when someone, when they were looking for somebody, and it just wasn't this glamorous, task that was worth anyone's effort other than just looking for a volunteer.
That's so important though, kid, because that's so important though, right? Because sometimes opportunity isn't this big golden elephant that is there for you to seize, right? Sometimes opportunity is all the small little things that you're doing, and you're doing well because you're putting effort in, that create, that opportunity down the road, right? We talk about this all the time, man. Like, you never know who's watching. You never know who's it doesn't matter if you're a ditch digger, or if you're at a Fortune 500 company. You have no idea who's watching you, and you have no idea how what you do day to day may be influencing the perception of other people that are watching you, and how that can lead to opportunity in life. It's like your story with Shags, right? Like, you had these times in your life where you had interaction with him, right? And all of that stuff has developed now to where now he's at SpaceX as well. you know, and so you never know how those things are going to unfold, which is why it's so important, even with the small things that seem minute or stupid or irrelevant, to continue to always put that best foot forward, to put that effort into it, to give it your best, right? To throw your hand up and say, yeah, I'll do the job that nobody else wants to do right now, because you never know how that's going to influence your trajectory down the road.
Well, even getting selected for this mission pilot for Polaris Dawn, I didn't anticipate a second mission. I thought this project was kind of a one and done, but I believed in its vision and what it was trying to accomplish. So I volunteered to do all the shit work, more or less.
Yeah.
And I put my best foot forward, you know, and come to find out when we got to the conclusion of Inspiration 4, it was like, hey, you know, based on your efforts, I'd like to offer you this position as the pilot on this next mission. Same with Sarah Gillis. She was his trainer, and she had done such a great job training him to be an astronaut and put in the time and effort and energy. She was offered the position as the mission specialist. So you never know.
Yeah, you don't, right?
What doors are going to open up.
Well, that reminds me of a story that I'm from Alabama and I'm a Nick Saban fan. All right. So you can throw your rocks now, whatever. But he told this story, giving this leadership speech, and he was talking about knowing your role in a team. No matter what that role is, you should execute that at 110%, execute every role at a high level. And he had talked to this or told the story of the street sweeper that was out sweeping streets. And his story was, if you're the street sweeper, you should sweep streets so good that they put a bronze statue out in front of your hometown and say, the best street sweeper in the world lives here. And that's the level of that you have to execute those things, like carrying shit around and going and getting coffee for the crew and toting their bags. You know, the stuff that you classified as doing the shit work, man, that stuff adds up. And if you do that stuff at a high level, guess what? When they need somebody, you might be the first person they think of. The other thing is just being present, you know, being there. And I think this is a double-edged sword, because we've all fallen into this trap. In a fighter squadron, you fall into this trap of, well, I need to show my face. I need to be around there so the commander and the DO can see me and, you know, give this illusion that I'm engaged and I'm trying hard and everything. But in reality, I think the more important piece of it is being present. And there's a difference there between just being there and actually being there, accomplishing something, doing something, helping out, you know, not just sitting in the scheduling room bitching at the guy throwing pucks, but actually helping do something. And that creates the perception that you are engaged and that you want to be there and that you want to be part of the team. And when there's an opening for the next level, maybe you're the guy that they talk to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And kid, I just want to congratulate you too, brother, because I can only imagine that it took a lot of courage, even though, you know, things kind of unfolded because of some of the relationships that you had built in that pivot to Draken, but the courage to go, and because I think a lot of guys in that position would just fall back on what they know, right? And go, yeah, dude, I'll come fly for you, or I'll be the chief of flat ops or whatever you need, right? And you're like, hey man, I'm going to make a pivot here, and I'm going to try to learn something else and kind of expand my horizons and see where that takes me, right? That's creating opportunity, right? What you did in that moment was create opportunity for yourself that led to something else, right? And all of that cumulatively has led to you being able to be the mission pilot on this Polaris Dawn mission, which is, you know, fucking awesome, man. That's really cool, right? So, I mean, my point in saying that is, right, if you hadn't have done that, if you hadn't have taken that risk, if you hadn't have gotten outside of your comfort zone, if you wouldn't have chosen to make those pivots and had courage over comfort to go seize and create those opportunities for yourself, we might not be having this conversation right now, right? You might not be the mission pilot on Polaris Dawn. So that's awesome, dude. And that's what we try to convey to guys on the pod that are listening to the podcast, right? That's how you do it.
Yeah, you make a good point. It's I didn't want to fall into the standard trap of you know, what is the logical evolution of us fighter pilots post military. You know, I got nothing against the airline life. My brother-in-law flies for the airlines, and it's good living. You know, you prioritize family and provide a lot of good security. And but based on the decision that I made, it was just about stepping outside my comfort zone, and it you know, humbling myself to learn something new, because I again, my academic background, outdoor education, it was like I knew nothing about the business world and how to write contracts and negotiate with the government. And then the follow-on step with, you know, VP of strategy, trying to figure out fintech. And Jared's a brilliant mind who high school dropout who created this multi-billion-dollar company. And just trying to learn from him, something he had been doing for decades. And I was way out of my comfort zone on that piece. Yeah, so you never know what happens when you do take those risks.
Yeah.
Cass, when you were talking just a second ago and listening to the story here, I'm seeing that, I mean, you've obviously accomplished a lot. Okay. And kudos to you. And, you know, I think when we're in it, we probably don't take time to pat ourselves on the back and recognize some of those accomplishments as we go. But more importantly, I think there's a lot of people that may be looking at your resume or, you know, your bio or whatever, and they say, "Oh, it must be nice to be an astronaut and for SpaceX. That's got to be pretty cool." And my message to those guys, I want you to kind of expand on this a little bit. My message to those guys was, yeah, it is nice, but what you don't see is the 30 years of hard work that went into that. Struggling through college, picking a major that you thought that you could crush and you still struggled with it, getting over the fear of heights, you know, I mean, struggling through pilot training, struggling through weapons school, I mean, these are things like, I want to get this through. If I have a mission in life now, I need to accept this, but my mission would be to get through to this younger generation that good things that come to those who wait is just the shit left over for the guys who worked hard and got there first. Stop waiting and get off your ass and go do something. And it's going to be hard. Right. It's going to be difficult. You're going to be fraught with obstacles and challenges, man. But you put your head down and you figure out a way around them.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Yeah, like I'm so glad you brought that up, Roscoe, because the next question I was going to ask Kid is, I don't think people recognize how much effort it takes to get to where you're sitting right now, right? Like if you could guess, how many hours or days do you think over the last year you have spent preparing for what is in essence going to be 5 days in space, right? Like how many countless hours, how much effort has gone into just the preparation to do what you're going to do for 5 days? Like, I don't think people recognize that.
Yeah. And it's
speak to that.
When we think of, you know, doing air to ground simulator or an air to air prepping for a red flag mission, the time, energy, and effort that goes into planning the details of those, nothing compares to the level of scrutiny we've done for every single movement planned for this space mission. And that's not to downplay what we've done in the fighter community. It's just the point is to putting light on how much attention to detail is put into prepping for this mission. And a perfect example is the EVA, the spacewalk, extravehicular activity. It's only going to be, it's about a 2-hour duration, but I think we've dedicated, days, weeks, months just for those 2 hours. We've rehearsed it and there's no fast forward button in the simulator. If you sit there and dwell and pre-breathe for 40 minutes, you're going to do every 40 minutes. You repressurize the capsule. You go, there's no obviously in the simulator, it's atmospheric pressure. It's 14.7 psi. There's no pressurization or vacuum that we're dealing with. It's all simulated, but it may take hours to do that. We're going to sit there pressurized in our suit, getting the cabin repressurized, and we go through every single minute and second rehearsing a 1-for-1. So, to answer your question, it's so much time, energy, and effort. And that's the reason why this mission has taken, we're coming up on 3 years of training, because we're not going to go until we're ready. In fact, ironically, leading up to this podcast, we're doing a launch readiness review, and there's debate on, are we ready, on certain elements of it. Not to share too much, but everything's looking good for a launch on the 26th. It's we're not going to do it until we're 100% ready, and getting ready is what your point is. It takes a lot of time, energy, and effort to achieve that. Just like anything that you want to accomplish in life, we're all given gifts, God-given gifts. It's just a matter of, are you willing to put in the effort with passion to achieve those goals you set forth, harnessing the gifts that you have. And that's what life's all about, is trying to figure out what those gifts are and what I'm passionate about, and how can I apply those skill sets to achieve those goals with a burning passion to do that.
I used to tell all my football players that I used to laugh at them and be like, hey, everybody has a talent. We're going to find yours. It may be through process of elimination. Like if you're a little roly-poly kid, maybe sprints aren't your talent, but maybe strength is. We can whittle this down a little bit. But dude, you touched on something there when you were talking about the preparation and you're going through these readiness checks and everything. Another theme that we've talked about on the show is, when is good enough good enough? Like, how do you know? Whether it's a personal goal that you've set, you're training for a triathlon, how do you know that your training is good enough to go to the race? Obviously you have a deadline there, and that kind of helps, but in something that may be a little more open-ended than this one, you can kind of just keep kicking this can as far as you need to until you're ready. But how do you know? Is there a metric that you use? Is it a gut feeling? Is it, when everybody stands up in the sim and high fives? What is it?
Yeah. Or is it a process of also like setting goals, and smaller goals along the way, and little benchmarks that you're trying to get to, and if you hit one, great, you adjust, or if you don't hit one, you adjust from there. What do you do, kid?
Man, my initial gut was assessing the objectivity versus a subjective assessment of it. In the SpaceX world, objectivity, they're going to set. They're going to do all the analysis. They're going to do modeling to figure out the best approach, and then they're going to do a lot of testing. And if they meet the thresholds and pass the testing, if not, they're going to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to fix what they need to fix. So it's a constant analysis, objectively speaking, and a lot of those things, suit related, is what ultimately caused us some delays throughout the process, pushing back launch dates because the suit just wasn't ready, or something with the capsule just wasn't ready. Training wise, and a lot of that is some of the setbacks were driven by our training, but it was also a byproduct of some of that testing where we test one way, but those protocols weren't good enough, so we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out new procedures. Again, being a developmental program, we got to figure out new procedures on changes in the hardware and software.
Hold on, can I interrupt you for 1 second, kid?
Yeah.
So are you saying that achieving a goal or achieving success towards a goal isn't a straight line? Are you saying it's not linear?
No,
we talk about that all the time too, right? Like
no
sometimes,
way.
a lot of times it's one step forward, 2 steps back. Sometimes you got to go in reverse. And we talk a lot about, don't get so myopically focused on there's only one path that I can take to get to where I want to go, because it's going to shutter you from seeing the other opportunities that may exist around you. And it's never a straight path, man. Roscoe, you and I probably all have 3 different stories about how we found a cockpit, and 3 different ways that we all got there, And so I just wanted to throw that out there because it ties in. So what you're saying ties in so well with some of the things that we try to convey on the podcast to people.
Yeah, I'd love to show you guys the inside workings of the suit development. I mean, that alone of what they envisioned when they started off with the basic baseline suit they used to go to and from the space station. It's called an IVA suit. That was the baseline. And they had this vision of, this is the end goal. But over the course of 2 years, that end goal as complete, I mean, it took left and right turns and tangents. And, we come in 1 week with different bearings on one sleeve for pressurization, and then the next week it's completely different retrofitted hardware. The HUD development, it's kind of this like scorpion helmet looking HUD monocle, literally developed over the weekend in some dude's garage to figure out how we could project certain data metrics, pressurization, relative humidity, temperature, time. And it's evolved every time. It's something new. They make adjustments based on the feedback. And now it's this cool HUD that we have in this helmet. And it was all based off this idea that we came up with and the trial and error to figure out how to get to that solution, that end state. Through the teamwork, through all the effort that the team put forth to accomplish those goals.
Is there a balance there between, I think when we were doing mission planning back in the day, we could probably get to an 80% solution and execute an 80% plan and probably win at that point. You fill in the other 20% with just a little bit of experience and maybe some good smart audibles based on some SA that you have. Is there a balance between that and chasing perfection before you do something like this? Because I imagine the margin of error in what you're doing is very small, minuscule, non-existent, as opposed to, if we go out to the NTTR and we fail on the DT mission, we come back, we debrief it, we go home that night.
I wish there was a good correlation between our experiences and what I've experienced in training for space. There's definitely some deltas there. I think probably the best way to view it is it's a spectrum. I'm
just say it,
kid, it depends. 80% solution.
Just say it depends.
Yeah, it depends. I'm that 80% guy. If it's close enough in this SpaceX world and strapping yourself into a rocket and going to space, they're a lot closer to that 100% solution.
That makes sense.
They will not settle. And I appreciate that. My family appreciates that. It's what, creates that level of confidence we have in the systems and the engineers behind those systems. So, if I had to kind of capture, it's more of a spectrum, I think. And depending on the level of, I guess, I don't even know how to describe it, but level of risk, maybe. Although flying fighters is a pretty risky business, but at times we would settle for an 80% solution and a game plan because we're willing to take some warts on some of those red flag missions where it's OCA against China and it's the last day and we're going to throw the kitchen sink at them. But I guess a lot of that's simulation, whereas what I'm dealing with right now, it's kind of a real world all for nothing thing.
Yeah. Are you an 80% guy in your personal training for your triathlons?
That's a great question. I used to be. It was all about volume. As long as I did as much as I possibly could, I've gotten smarter over they have this, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but they got this software now. It's AI driven. You do a test in the bike, swim and run, kind of like it's called FTP, functional threshold power. You do this test and it sets here are your numbers. Here's your capability. You put it into the system and it generates this AI and it incorporates smart training where you do take rest, where before it was all about just full throttle.
Yeah.
There was no vector. I just wanted to go full throttle, do as much as I possibly could. Now it's a little bit smarter, being a little bit more efficient, utilizing the resources that you have to come up with the best solution by balls to the wall.
Yeah, right on.
Well, hey, that brings up a good point, though. And I want to go back to almost to the beginning of the show where you were talking about early on, you were talking about goals and how you were always kind of driven. You just kind of had this, I don't know, it came from within. All right. Whether it was just in your personality or whatever, you hated the kindergartner teacher, whatever it was. But I think that goal setting, there is a process. There's definitely some methods out there that you can follow, whether it's the ABC process or the SMART process or the models or whatever. But can you give us maybe kids techniques on, how do you set a goal and then how do you measure whether you're meeting that goal just in your personal life, whether it's going to space or training or, playing with your kids, whatever it is.
See, we're giving him all the questions he never gets on these other ones.
I know.
We'll talk about space botany later.
But suit. Yeah. No, I talk about that too much, and it's no, I can never talk about that too much. Oh man, setting goals.
Well, we talk about on here, we've kind of broken out a couple of times. We've talked about it's important to have something that's very objective, right? It's got to be gradable, first of all.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of different ways you can get there, but you have to have this, you have to throw it up on a board and be able to have it basically a yes or no answer, or a plus or a minus, right? So do you do something similar to that, or you just kind of freewheel it, or is it based on a gut feeling that you have? How do you approach that?
I would, what comes to mind is previous experiences, where have I failed? Where have I succeeded in the past? And what's coming to mind is training for triathlon. I have certainly failed in the past, whether it was a DNF or just didn't meet a time goal or place or achieve the world championships, qualify for the world championships. So based on those experiences and the training I did to achieve those goals, I relied upon kind of an internal debrief of what were the experiences leading up to that and what was the race like that failed. So I certainly rely on previous experiences when setting new goals. I also do think I need to be realistic. And I think some of that comes with maturity and aging. I'm tired of failing. And what comes to mind is the pacing, which is really important in an Ironman triathlon. It's like if I start the swim full pace and I'm out of breath in the first 5 minutes, I know what's going to happen. It's going to be an extremely painful day, and I'm going to put myself into this lactate threshold. It's going to be a really bad day for me. So I think of pacing and what requires setting an achievable goal is being realistic about what I can achieve. And a lot of that realism comes from where am I at in my training? Have I put in the effort? Or am I, kidding myself on, am I really prepared for this? And did I skip too many workouts? Did I put in the time and effort? And am I meeting the numbers I'm supposed to in practice, in training to be able to achieve the goals that I'm looking to do?
Do
then
you set
adjusting them along the way?
Do you set your time goal prior to starting your training, or do you wait until race day to set your time goal?
Well, it's actually this AI program. It will generate you put in the course you want to race. I sound like I'm promoting this whole TriDot software. You based on those tests you do, you put in the race that you want to accomplish and when it's going to occur, and it will project a time for you. And if it, so more or less, that's my goal is this AI generated time. And now, as long as I put in the effort and energy into the training plan, I should, in theory, be able to achieve this goal. But if I don't like that goal, I'm going to make adjustments because of what, if that time's not going to meet my ultimate goal of qualifying for the World Championships, then what am I doing? I got to make adjustments. And
how many triathlons how many Ironmans have you done, kid?
I've done 15.
15.
I did 4 World Championships in Kona.
Oh yeah, no big deal. I've just done 15. It's
but
like,
but the reason I asked that, there's a point behind my asking you that question, because you talked about, whether I didn't finish or I didn't hit my time, right? And so if we think about those 15 evolutions, there were evolutions in there where maybe you didn't finish a race, correct? And that didn't stop you from,
out of the 15, there's 3 that I can't say proud, that were good experiences, and I'm more or less I'm proud of.
Yeah.
Those other 12, there was failures along the way.
Yeah, well, my point in saying that, though, is, right, like, you didn't hit that failure or that DNF and go, well, obviously this is too hard or this is too difficult, and so I'm just going to throw my hands up and I'm never going to do this again. This was a waste of time, right? No, dude, you've done 15 of them, only 3 of which you're proud of, evidently. So, I mean, but that's my point, right? Like, dude, because we talk about all the time on the podcast, right, man? You're going to set goals, you're going to set objectives for yourself, and you may come up short. And that's okay, right? Because you're going to learn things in that process that you can take away that are going to make you better to get closer to it the next time, right? And that's the point, is you don't give up. You continue to put in the effort, you make the adjustments, you pivot, you take the lessons learned, you apply them, and you just keep this continual process of getting better. Would you agree with that?
And Roscoe, absolutely. Roscoe hit upon, talking about adversity. It's inevitable. We're going to hit adversity in some form or fashion. Sometimes it's significant, sometimes it's small roadblocks, but it's something, and that Sat-1 mission, dropping bombs on the wrong target, I could have completely thrown my hands up and said, I'm done. I can't do this. Those races that, there was one I didn't finish. I could have easily said, all right, this is dumb. What am I doing? I can't do this. But actually, and there's, everyone's going to have their ups and downs.
Sure.
I walked away from that going, what did I do wrong? I feel like a failure, but it's how you handle that adversity. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to throw your hands up? Or are you going to, do a little internal debrief and figure out where you failed and what you could have done better, and, give yourself some reflection time, but then set that next goal.
Yeah, adversity and challenges are an opportunity to learn and grow, right? They're really opportunities. We view them as challenge. We talk about them as challenges often, but they're really opportunity, right? And that opportunity is growth and learning. So I think that's a great point, man.
Hey, that what you were just talking about, man, that's a really good point for the listeners that we can kind of break out for just a second right here. Where you were talking about that you have a little debrief on the side. And I think that we take for granted sometimes, just based on the way that we grew up. We're very accustomed to doing this on a micro scale, literally like every day, 2 or 3 times a day sometimes, where you get very good at what was the goal? Did I meet it? Yes or no? If not, why? And then how do I do it better next time? And you learn to ask those questions so that you can insert those instructional fixes along the way. But for somebody who doesn't get as many reps as we did, do you have any tips or tricks maybe that you could pass to them? So somebody who, is maybe new to this or is thinking about setting a lofty goal, and how do you check yourself along the way?
Absolutely. And some of those debrief techniques that we use in the fighter community, I still use to this day, no matter what the task is. It's like taking a step back, I go, okay, what were my executional errors? Is there some of those execution errors that I can pin down as a root cause? What was the true root cause? And then how am I going to fix those in the future? What are the instructional fixes? And what's that DFP? What's the takeaway? That's a very complex process, and sometimes it works great for some of the things we do for the simulators in the capsule. We do this all the time. We kind of take those elements and break it down and figure out where we can learn and move on and do better. But for some things in life that are a little bit simpler, or more elementary, just taking elements of that, just simply recognizing, okay, what did I screw up? And taking ownership of those mistakes and not just blaming someone and just walking away going, oh, that was that dude's fault, or it was her fault. It's not something I did. Well, maybe it was something that the contributing factor might have been your attitude or something you did in the process. But so taking an honest look at what went wrong and how can I take ownership on some of
You're
those
saying that
mistakes.
humility in that process is important?
And accountability. And
accountability.
accountability.
Oh, wow. Imagine that.
Well, and it's
Accountability.
It's personal accountability too, right? It's being honest. It's being courageous enough to be honest with yourself, to hold yourself accountable for where you may have had failings as well. So that's all good stuff. Well, I got one final question for you, kid. If you could go back and talk to 20-year-old kid Poteet doing underwater basket weaving and whitewater rafting, evidently at college, what would you tell him?
Oh, I mean, it sounds like a pop out, but I'm going to go back to some of the elements we've already talked about. It's like, yes, I think I can say I was a fairly humble person throughout my career, but there were times where I wasn't. So I would definitely advise the young kid Poteet to always stay humble no matter what. Never burn a bridge, because those relationships, it takes a village, and you're not going to be able to achieve it on your own. Nothing I've accomplished was just because of me. Even training for an Ironman, I got 3 kids to raise. My wife's taking a lot of the heavy load. I'm going to space. She's taking the heavy lifting to take care of our family, which is the number one priority. So, staying humble and recognizing where you need help to with those relationships. So never burning a bridge. And one message I always try to stress is do some internal reflection to figure out what your gifts are, because we all have them, and if you can identify those gifts and be passionate about whatever goals you set in life, it's going to make the journey that much more enjoyable, whether you achieve it or not. Even in failure, if you're passionate and you're embracing the gifts that you have, it's going to be a great ride no matter what.
Self-inspection's important.
I was just about to say that sounds an awful lot like self-inspection.
That's exactly what
I think there was an element in your story too, man, about have some guts and take your shot. You might not always know what's behind door number 2. Could be good, could be a super hard challenge, but it takes a little bit of guts to take some of these opportunities and to step out of that comfort zone and to try some of these new things. And we've all got good stories of some of that. By the time you get to our age, hopefully you've got some of those. But for the younger kids, I would say, dudes, like sometimes you need to step out and you don't necessarily know what's out there, but I don't know. I think if you give it the effort and you have a good attitude and you pay attention to your surroundings, I think it'll work out for you.
Yeah.
Regardless, one of the things I used to tell my football players was every day I had Coach White's big 3, and I would get them all in a circle and I'd just hold up 3 fingers and they'd all quieten down. I'd say, hey, what's Coach White's big 3? And they'd say attitude, attention, and effort. And that was my thing, man. If you bring me those 3 things on any given day, dude, we're going to do pretty good. Okay. So give maximum effort, pay attention to the instruction that's given to you, pay attention to your mentors, pay attention to your surroundings, give maximum effort, man. And in all cases, try to have a really good attitude about it. I had this kid today. He was on an X ride for an iPug ride, and he's not doing great. He's an A10 guy cross training over to the F-35, and it's really a challenge for him. And this is an ACM ride, so something he's kind of not familiar with. He's learning a new language. He's learning a new jet. and he's struggling really hard. But dude, the one thing that's going to save his ass in this whole thing is his attitude. And I told him as much, man. He and I were walking to the bathroom together. I said, dude, keep your chin up, all right? I don't care if you get 5 X's on that grade sheet. You keep a good attitude, and you're going to make it through this. I promise you.
All right, kid. Well, dude, we'll let you go. I know it's late for you, and I know you're busy, but we really appreciate you coming on, brother, and carving out some time.
I still have a list of questions. What, you're cutting me off?
Yeah.
I literally have a paper full, man.
Hey, Roscoe, we'll revisit when I get back.
Yeah, that sounds good, man. We'll have you back on when you have a little more time in your schedule. But yeah, dude, we seriously greatly appreciate you coming on and carving out some time for us. We appreciate it very much. And dude, we wish you the best in the next couple of weeks and a safe and successful launch. And
yeah, man,
I bring you back home, man.
Hey, take some good pictures and send over to the Be One Change One podcast, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We're taking quite a few cameras with GoPro.
Awesome.
We'll some of those actually. So yeah, we'll take some good photo.
Right so on. Just real quick for the listeners, you said that you were scheduled for the 26th to go up.
So right now it's no earlier than the 26th at 3:38 a.m.
Okay.
Out of Kennedy Space Center. It can be watched on the SpaceX YouTube channel. They telecast all the live launches. So
yeah, and I was going to ask
we'll definitely tune into that.
I was going to ask you, kid, if anybody wants to find you or find more information about Polaris Dawn, is there anything you want to drop just to where people can find that info?
Yeah, you can find everything on our website, which is PolarisProgram, one word, .com. I'm Kid Poteet and on all things social. Not that I'm very good at it, but
right on.
Yeah, we'll definitely make sure that all makes it into the show notes.
Roscoe, what else you got, buddy?
Nothing, man. Be the change.
Be the one.
Thanks for flying with the Be One Change One podcast. If you got something out of this show, then be the one and share it in your circles of influence.
You can be our wingman through our website at www.b1change1.com. That's B and the number 1, change and the number 1.com.
We invite you to be the one and join our fighter squadron on social media at B1Change1 on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can follow us at Paul Roscoe White on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, as well as Roscoe's website, www.paulroscoewhite.com.
You can email us from the website and please leave comments, share, and ask questions, or leave ideas of things you would like to discuss on future podcasts. Most importantly, be the one that helps us win the algorithm by leaving a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Thanks for joining. Until next time, be the one.